I knew something shattered the moment he did not lift his gaze from his desk. He spoke my name the way a CEO speaks before a career dies. Calm, icy, irrevocable. Then came the verdict. You will apologize to her tonight. Not in private, not tomorrow. Tonight, at the company party, in front of the people who decided futures. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Apologize. Girlfriend. Tonight. Those words should never have shared the same breath. Yet here they were, as if they had every right to exist. The office became a glass cage where emotions had no place. He listed consequences like reading a verdict. Salary frozen, promotion gone, reputation questioned. Each word was a scalpel, precise and cold. If you have ever felt someone's power press you into a corner, you know that feeling. That tightness in your chest when you realize this is not a request. It is a command. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a moment where silence felt safer than standing your ground? A document slid toward me, my name at the top, corporate language below, so polite it cut like ice. He leaned back, waiting for panic, waiting for me to fold. Here's the part that still chills me. He truly believed I would break, because this was never about making peace. It was about making a point. He wanted witnesses. He wanted proof of my place. He wanted her shielded and me silenced. So let me ask you, if you were in my shoes, with your dignity on one side and your career on the other, what would you do? Drop your story below. I am listening. I looked at him, and something inside me went still. This was not a husband anymore. This was a CEO enforcing his will. I felt calm, not defeated, just ready. I said one word. Okay. He smiled, thinking he had won. What he did not know was that the moment I agreed, the story stopped being about submission. And if you have ever been underestimated at the exact moment you change the game, keep watching. Because what happened next was quiet, calculated, and absolutely not what he expected. The numbers started lining up in my head before the emotions did. My salary was the first thing he reached for because it was immediate and visible. A clean suspension, effective right away, dressed up as procedure. No shouting, no threats, just a quiet reminder that my independence lived on a payroll he controlled. That paycheck was not pocket money. It paid for the life I had built piece by piece, my savings plan, my health coverage, my sense of stability. Losing it would not just sting. It would change how I moved through the world the very next morning. Then came the promotion, the one I had worked toward for years, the one that had already been approved, whispered about, scheduled to be announced after the holidays. Vice President, a title that meant credibility, authority, proof that I was not just the CEO's wife playing business. He said it like it was nothing. Promotion canceled. Promotion canceled. As if years of late nights, strategic wins, and quiet sacrifices could be erased with a sentence. What hurt most was not the loss itself. It was the implication. That my success was conditional, that it existed only as long as I stayed agreeable. And then there was my reputation. That was the real weapon. He did not say the word scandal, but he did not need to. He talked about concerns, documentation, notes in my personnel file, language designed to follow me long after this moment ended. The kind of phrasing that makes people pause before returning your emails. The kind that closes doors without ever slamming them. I could already picture it. Meetings where my name came up and the room went quiet. Opportunities that quietly disappeared. Colleagues who smiled politely, but kept their distance. If you have ever watched a woman's credibility unravel, while the explanation stayed conveniently vague. You know exactly how that works. And here is the part that mattered most. All of this could be avoided with one apology, one sentence, one public moment of humiliation, one confirmation that I understood who had the power and who did not. That was the trade: career for dignity, security for silence. If you were counting losses on paper, the smart move was obvious. Apologize. Take the hit to your pride. Move on. But something about that math felt wrong, because what he was really asking me to give up was not a paycheck or a title. It was my voice, my credibility, my ability to ever push back again. Once you accept that kind of correction, it never happens just once. I stood there realizing that whatever I chose would follow me long after the party ended. Long after the music stopped and the champagne glasses were cleared away. This was not about one night. It was about who I would be allowed to become after it. He did not argue with me. He did not plead. He did not even try to explain himself. That was the part that unsettled me most. He spoke the way he spoke in quarterly reviews, calm and precise, as if my life were a line item he had already decided to cut. His voice carried that polished authority I had heard him use on executives twice his age, the same tone that shut down debate without ever raising volume. I realized, standing there, that I had not been addressed as a wife at all. I was being managed. Every sentence came wrapped in corporate language: process, policy, professional expectations. He talked about alignment and outcomes, about what was best for the company, as if the company were not something we had built together from the ground up. When I asked why this had to be public, he did not say because she mattered to him. He said visibility was important. He said it would set the right example. He said leadership required difficult decisions. Those words used to impress me. Now they sounded hollow. He leaned back in his chair, fingers folded, watching my reaction like a performance metric. There was no hesitation in him, no conflict, no flicker of doubt, just confidence rooted in the assumption that power always wins. That was when the imbalance became impossible to ignore. He was not just my husband. He was my boss, my evaluator, the final authority over my income, my title, and my professional future. He knew it. He was using it, and he expected me to accept it quietly. I thought about how often I had defended him in rooms he was not in, how many times I had softened his edges for other people, how often I had told myself that leadership came with pressure, that his detachment was just part of the job. But this was different. This was not pressure. This was convenience. It was easier to discipline me than confront her, easier to silence me and admit he had crossed a line, easier to frame this as professionalism than acknowledge betrayal. He talked about respect, but what he meant was compliance. He talked about teamwork, but what he wanted was obedience. And the more he spoke, the clearer it became that he had already rewritten the story in his head. In his version, I was the problem. I was emotional. I was disruptive. I had made things uncomfortable. That narrative allowed him to stay in control without ever questioning himself. I watched him carefully then, noticing things I had ignored for years. How he avoided eye contact when the topic drifted toward anything personal. How he returned to policy whenever emotion threatened to surface. How he framed every demand as reasonable, even when it stripped someone else of choice. This was the man he had become. Not cruel, not explosive, just quietly dominant. If you have ever dealt with someone who hides control behind calm language, you know how disorienting it feels. They never look like the villain. They never sound unreasonable. And yet, somehow you always end up smaller by the end of the conversation. I felt it happening in real time. The power imbalance was not shouted. It was implied. He did not need to say he could destroy my career. He had already outlined exactly how. And the worst part was this: he genuinely believed he was being fair. That realization landed heavier than any threat. Because a man who knows he is wrong might hesitate. A man who believes he is justified never does. By the time he finished speaking, the decision had already been made. Not by him, by me. I just had not said it out loud yet. Her name had been floating around long before I ever attached a face to it. At first, it came up casually. A new hire, impressive background, fresh perspective. He mentioned her the way people mention weather, briefly and without emphasis. I noticed because he almost never talked about people that way. He usually had opinions, strong ones. When I asked questions, he smiled and brushed them off. She was talented. She was ambitious. She was someone the company needed. And then came the line that should have stopped me cold. You do not need to worry about her. That sentence is never said for no reason. She started appearing in meetings I was not scheduled for. Strategy sessions that used to include me suddenly did not. When I asked why, the answer was always clean and reasonable. She brought innovation. She had a different lens. It was good to diversify voices. On paper, it made sense. In my gut, it did not. Her title arrived fast. Chief Innovation Officer, a role that overlapped uncomfortably with my work. When I pointed that out, he laughed it off and said I was overthinking it. He told me I was being territorial. He told me I should be proud of him for attracting top talent. So I swallowed it. Then the small things started stacking up. Late nights he did not explain. Text messages he turned away from me. A shift in energy when her name came up. Subtle but unmistakable. He became protective in a way he had not been with anyone else. Defensive, sharp. Once, at a company event, I saw them across the room together. They were not touching. They did not need to. The familiarity sat comfortably between them, like something already established. She laughed at something he said, and he leaned in slightly. Not enough to be obvious, enough to be intimate. I remember thinking, that feels off. If you have ever ignored that feeling because you wanted to trust someone you loved, you already know where this is going. When I finally met her properly, she was polished, confident, younger than I expected. She looked me in the eye and smiled like she had nothing to hide. She spoke easily, using the right words, presenting herself as competent and unthreatening. I wanted to believe her. Instead, I noticed how she deferred to him in public, but challenged others freely. How she spoke about the company as if she already belonged at the center of it. How she avoided direct conversations with me while maintaining perfect professionalism. She never crossed a line in ways that could be called out. That was the problem. Everything stayed just inside the boundary of plausible deniability. And every time I circled back to him, every time I asked if something was going on, he responded the same way. Calm, slightly amused, insistent that I was imagining things. That is how doubt works. Not loudly, quietly. By the time the truth became impossible to ignore, I had already been trained to question my instincts instead of his behavior. So when he later asked me to apologize to her, publicly, I finally understood something. She was never the side story. She was the setup, and I had been standing in it the entire time without realizing how carefully it had been arranged. The word came out quieter than I expected. Okay. No pause before it. No shake in my voice. Just one clean syllable that landed softly and still managed to change the temperature of the room. His shoulders relaxed immediately, not dramatically, just enough to tell me he thought the moment had passed. He nodded once, already moving on in his head, already filing this underhandled. That reaction told me everything. He did not hear surrender. He heard compliance. Men like him are trained to recognize resistance, tears, anger, negotiation. When none of that shows up, they assume control has worked. They assume silence means acceptance. What he did not recognize was the shift happening right in front of him. Because my okay did not come from fear. It came from clarity. Something inside me clicked into place, sharp and steady. The panic he expected never arrived. In its place came distance, the kind that lets you see a situation exactly as it is, without emotion clouding the edges. I stopped trying to be understood in that moment. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped searching his face for empathy. I stopped hoping he would remember who I was to him. He kept talking, outlining next steps, explaining how this would blow over quickly if I just did what he asked. He even softened his tone, like he was being generous now. I barely heard him. My attention shifted inward, running through questions he had no idea I was asking. What do I actually owe this situation? What do I need to protect? What happens if I stop reacting and start observing? That was the silent shift. If you have ever gone quiet in the middle of chaos, you know the feeling. It is not weakness. It is the moment you step back and let the other person reveal exactly how far they think they can go. He thought the problem was solved. He did not notice that I stopped looking at him like a partner and started looking at him like a variable. Something to be measured, predicted, managed. That is the danger of underestimating someone who stops arguing. He smiled then, brief and satisfied, and said something about how this was the mature choice, how things would return to normal after tonight. Normal. The word almost made me laugh. Nothing was returning to normal. Normal required trust. Normal required respect. Normal required two people standing on equal ground. All of that had already disappeared. I nodded once more, played the role he expected, and stood up to leave. He let me go easily, convinced the hardest part was over. He had no idea that the moment I said okay, I started planning my exit. And the calm he mistook for obedience was actually the space I needed to move without being seen. That was the last time he underestimated me. He just did not know it yet. Before I became his wife, I was already someone. That matters, because it is easy for people to rewrite your history once your last name changes. Easy to pretend your ambition showed up after the marriage, not long before it. Easy to forget that you had a direction before your life became attached to someone else's title. I grew up believing that independence was not optional. It was survival. I learned early how to take up space without apologizing for it. I was not loud, but I was consistent. The kind of woman who shows up prepared, who listens carefully, who remembers details other people miss. My career mattered to me long before love complicated it. I chose my field because it challenged me, not because it looked good on paper. I liked solving problems. I liked building systems that worked quietly in the background, while other people took credit for the results. I liked knowing that my work had weight, even if no one clapped for it. Ambition for me was never about status. It was about control over my own life. I worked hard, not performative hard, real hard, long hours, uncomfortable conversations, saying no when it would have been easier to agree. I earned my place step by step, without shortcuts. When I met him, I did not feel smaller. That was the trap. He admired my drive at first. He told me I was sharp, grounded, someone who made rooms better just by being in them. He listened when I spoke, asked questions, treated my opinions like they mattered. It felt equal. Looking back now, I see how rare that feeling became later. But at the start, I believed we were building something together. Two ambitious people choosing partnership instead of competition. I believed love did not require erasing yourself to keep it, My values were simple. Integrity mattered more than optics. Respect mattered more than titles. Silence was not peace if it came at the cost of your voice. Those values did not change when I married him. What changed was how often I was asked to compromise them. I did not dream of being known as the CEO's wife. I dreamed of being respected in rooms where decisions were made. I wanted influence, not proximity to power. I wanted to be heard because my ideas were solid, not because of who sat next to me. And for a while, I was. People came to me directly, trusted my judgment, asked for my perspective. I earned credibility the slow way, the only way that lasts. Marriage did not take that away overnight. It eroded it quietly. The more his power grew, the more people started looking past me to him. The more introductions changed, the more my work was framed as supportive instead of strategic. At first, I corrected it politely. Later, I noticed I was correcting it alone. Somewhere along the way, my identity became optional in his story. Convenient when it served him, invisible when it did not. That night in his office, standing across from a man who spoke to me like an employee instead of a partner, I realized something painful but important. The woman I had been before marriage never would have accepted that ultimatum. She would have recognized it for what it was immediately. She would not have questioned her instincts. She would not have tried to be reasonable with someone who had already decided to be unfair. That woman was still in me. She had just been quiet for a while, and now she was paying attention again. There was a time when being with him felt easy in the way real partnerships do. Not effortless, but balanced. We were two people moving in the same direction, carrying weight together instead of keeping score. Decisions were shared. Wins were mutual. Losses were absorbed as a team. Back then, love did not feel like negotiation. We talked about everything. Late nights stretched into early mornings, sitting at the kitchen counter with laptops open and half-finished coffee growing cold beside us. We debated ideas, challenged each other, laughed when plans fell apart, and rebuilt them anyway. When something went wrong, it was never about blame. It was about fixing it. That mattered to me more than romance. Trust grew in the small moments. He asked for my opinion and actually waited for the answer. I trusted him with my doubts, my fears, the parts of myself I did not show easily. He trusted me with his ambitions, his insecurities, the pressure he carried but never admitted out loud. We struggled together too. People forget that part when they look at success later. There were months when money was tight, when opportunities felt just out of reach, when exhaustion sat heavy on both of us. We argued sometimes, of course, but the arguments stayed clean. No threats, no power plays, no trying to win by making the other person smaller. That is what partnership looks like. When he had a setback, I was the one who reminded him who he was. When I doubted myself, he grounded me. We celebrated progress quietly, not because we needed validation, but because we understood the work behind it. I believed we were building something solid. Marriage, at first, did not change that. If anything, it deepened it. We planned together. We made sacrifices together. When one of us pulled ahead, the other did not resent it. We trusted the balance would hold. I trusted him. That trust showed up in ways I did not even notice at the time. I defended him when people questioned his decisions. I filled in gaps he missed. I absorbed tension so he could focus. I believed protecting him also protected us. That belief lasted longer than it should have, because slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dynamic shifted. Conversations became shorter. Decisions happened without me in the room. Wins became his. Losses became shared. He stopped asking what I thought and started telling me what was already decided. I told myself it was temporary. Pressure does that to people. Growth phases are messy. Leadership comes with weight. Those explanations felt reasonable. Loving people often choose reasonable explanations over uncomfortable truths. But here is the thing about real partnership. It does not require silence to survive. Looking back, the warning signs were not dramatic. They were subtle. Missed check-ins, assumptions made on my behalf. Moments where I felt like support instead of equal footing. I ignored them because the foundation had been strong once. Because I believed history mattered more than present discomfort. Because I trusted the man I married more than the evidence in front of me. That trust did not disappear all at once. It thinned. And by the time I stood in his office, listening to him speak to me like a subordinate, I understood something painful. The partnership I had been protecting no longer existed. I had been holding on to the memory of it, not the reality. That realization hurt more than the ultimatum, more than the threat to my career, more than the public humiliation he expected me to accept. Because losing a job hurts. Losing the belief that someone sees you as an equal changes how you see everything. And once that trust breaks, there is no negotiation that can put it back together. There is only choice, and I was finally ready to make one. Success did not arrive like a celebration. It crept in quietly, wearing confidence and calling itself responsibility. At first, the changes were small enough to excuse. Longer hours, more meetings, a phone that never stopped buzzing. He started coming home mentally elsewhere, eyes still fixed on problems I was not part of anymore. I told myself this was normal. Growth phases demand focus. Leadership demands sacrifice. That is what people say, right? But success has a way of revealing things that pressure alone does not. It amplifies what already exists. As his influence expanded, his patience shrank. Conversations became transactional. When I raised concerns, he responded with phrases instead of answers. "We will circle back. That is not a priority right now. You are too close to this. Too close." That one stung. Distance followed aid, a shadow. He stopped asking how my day went. He stopped noticing when I was tired. When I spoke, he listened just long enough to respond, not to understand. The warmth we once had was replaced by efficiency. He started referring to himself differently too, not by name, by role. The CEO has to think big picture. The CEO cannot afford emotional decisions. The CEO needs loyalty. I remember the first time he said it like that. I laughed, thinking he was joking. He was not. Control slipped in where partnership used to live. Decisions were made before conversations happened. My role shifted quietly from contributor to support system. When I pushed back, he framed it as concern. When I insisted, he framed it as resistance. He never raised his voice. He did not need to. Control does not always come with volume. Sometimes it comes wrapped in calm explanations that leave you questioning whether you are the unreasonable one. If you have ever felt yourself shrinking without realizing when it started, you understand exactly what I mean. The power imbalance grew alongside his success. People deferred to him more. They stopped questioning him. And when fewer people challenge someone, they start believing they should not be challenged at all. I watched it happen in meetings. The way people waited for his approval before speaking. The way dissent softened into suggestions. The way praise became constant and criticism disappeared. Ego thrives in that kind of silence. At home, it showed up differently. He corrected me more, interrupted me, finished my sentences, as if he knew where I was going better than I did. When I called it out, he smiled and said I was being sensitive. That word again, sensitive. It is amazing how often that word gets used when a woman notices something real. Control does not announce itself. It tests boundaries first. A canceled plan here, a decision made without you there. A gentle reminder that your role is to support, not question. And because I loved him, because I believed in what we had built, I adjusted. I gave more space. I asked fewer questions. I picked my battles carefully. I told myself compromise was part of marriage. But compromise is mutual. Control is not. The distance between us widened slowly, just enough that it felt unsafe to cross. I started feeling like a guest in conversations that used to be ours, like an outsider watching someone else live a life that once included me. And here's the part that still gets me. He did not notice, or maybe he noticed and did not care. By the time the affair entered the picture, the groundwork had already been laid. Power had shifted. Control had settled in. My voice had been softened enough that silencing it felt justified. That night in his office was not a sudden betrayal. It was the final step in a pattern that had been building for years. Success did not change him overnight. It just gave him permission to stop pretending. I did not walk into that night looking for answers. That is important, because people always assume you know before you know. They assume there's a dramatic buildup, a confrontation, a moment where everything clicks at once. The truth is quieter than that. The truth waits until you are tired enough to stop bracing for it. I came home early. That was the mistake. The apartment was darker than usual, the lights low. The air heavy with a scent I did not recognize. Not perfume exactly, something softer, something intentional. I paused just inside the door, my bag still on my shoulder, listening. That was when I heard her laugh. Not loud, not careless, comfortable. It came from our bedroom. My body reacted before my mind did. A sharp stillness ran through me, like every instinct lining up at once. I stood there longer than I want to admit, staring at the hallway, counting breaths, waiting for my brain to catch up with what my senses already knew. I did not move forward. I did not need to. Everything I needed was already there. The way his voice sounded different, lower, relaxed. The way the space that used to be ours now held someone else without resistance. No secrecy, no urgency to hide. They were not worried about being caught. That realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. I turned away quietly. I left my bag where it was. I stepped back into the hallway and closed the door behind me without a sound. My hands were steady, which surprised me. My heart felt distant, like it had stepped back to watch instead of feel. I drove for a long time without a destination. Streetlights blurred. Music played without registering. I kept thinking this should feel louder. There should be anger, panic, something dramatic. Instead, there was a hollow calm. When I finally stopped, it was in a parking lot I did not recognize. I sat there with the engine running, staring at my reflection in the windshield, trying to understand how a life can split so cleanly without making a sound. The devastation came later. It came in pieces. It came when I realized how long this must have been happening. How many conversations suddenly made sense. How many moments I had second-guessed myself instead of questioning him. It came when I thought about how easily he had lied. Not with words, but with omission. With comfort. With routine. I did not cry that night. I think my body was protecting me. I went to a hotel, checked in under my name, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall until morning light crept in through the curtains. Every so often my phone lit up with messages from him. I did not open them. Silence felt safer. If you have ever discovered a betrayal that rewrote your entire recent past, you know the kind of quiet devastation I am talking about. It is not explosive. It is disorienting. Like realizing the ground you trusted was never solid. By morning, something had shifted. I was still hurt, still stunned, but I was also awake. I did not confront him. I did not demand explanations. I did not ask questions I already knew the answers to. Instead, I started noticing details, patterns, timing, behavior. I thought back to meetings I was excluded from, decisions made without me, the way she had stepped into spaces that used to be mine with ease, the way he had defended her without hesitation. This was not a mistake. It was a choice. Multiple choices, made repeatedly, without regard for what it would cost me. That night did not break me. It clarified things. Because once you see the truth without filters, without excuses, without hope softening the edges, you cannot unsee it. And I understood something important before the sun even came up. The woman who walked out of that apartment was not the same woman who walked in. She was quieter, more observant, period. And she was done pretending she did not know what she knew. Clarity did not arrive with confidence. It arrived with quiet. It showed up the morning after, sitting beside me while I drank bad hotel coffee and stared out at a city that suddenly felt unfamiliar. My phone was full of missed calls and messages I did not open. Not because I was scared of them, but because I already knew what they would say. Explanations, justifications. Carefully shaped versions of events meant to soften what could not be softened. I realized then that I was done explaining myself to people who benefited from misunderstanding me. For so long, I had believed that if I said the right words, calmly enough, clearly enough, things would make sense, that reason would restore balance, that honesty would be met with honesty. That belief died quietly that morning. Detachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop offering your emotions to people who misuse them. It means you stop narrating your pain in hopes that someone else will validate it. I did not owe him a breakdown. I did not owe her a confrontation. I did not owe anyone a performance of how hurt I was. What I owed myself was focus. I started noticing how much energy I had spent managing reactions instead of protecting outcomes. How often I had softened my words to make other people comfortable. How frequently I had explained things that never should have required explanation in the first place. That habit ended there. When I finally saw him again, I did not ask questions. I did not raise my voice. I did not tell my side of the story. I listened. Not because I needed answers, but because listening tells you far more than arguing ever will. He talked. Carefully, strategically. He framed things as complicated. He suggested misunderstandings. He implied timing issues. Stress, distance, anything except responsibility. And I let him, because clarity had already done its work. I saw how quickly he centered himself, how easily the focus shifted from what he had done to how difficult this was for him. How naturally he assumed I would stay engaged in the emotional labor of fixing something he had broken. That was the moment I'd mentally stepped back. I stopped correcting his version of events. I stopped pointing out inconsistencies. I stopped explaining why something hurt. If you have ever reached that point, you know how strange it feels, almost unnatural, like breaking a habit you did not realize you had been practicing for years. But the quiet that followed was powerful. Without my explanations, his words stood on their own. Without my emotional responses, his justifications sounded thin. Without my participation, the dynamic shifted. He noticed it too. People always do. When you stop chasing understanding, you regain control of the narrative. When you stop reacting, you start observing. And when you observe closely, patterns become obvious. I saw how he expected access to me even after betrayal. How he assumed proximity without accountability. How he grew unsettled when I stopped offering reassurance. That reaction told me everything I needed to know. Detachment gave me clarity, and clarity gave me direction. I did not need to win an argument. I needed to decide my next move. And for the first time in a long time, my mind felt steady enough to plan without emotion getting in the way. That was the moment things truly changed. Not outwardly, internally. And once that shift happens, there is no going back. Silence became my advantage. Once I stopped explaining myself, I stopped broadcasting my thoughts. That shift changed everything. I moved through my days the same way I always had, calm, capable, professional, while my attention quietly redirected toward protection instead of repair. I did not announce anything. I did not threaten. I did not hint. I planned. The first thing I secured was legal clarity. Not dramatic, not aggressive, just informed. I booked a consultation under my own name during a lunch hour and asked questions I never thought I would need answers to. Separation, assets, employment protections, confidentiality. What mattered was not revenge. It was leverage and safety. Knowledge has a way of settling your nerves. I learned where I stood and where I did not, what could be touched and what could not, what documentation mattered, what timelines looked like. I did not need to act yet. I just needed to understand the terrain. Next came financial independence. I already earned well, but shared structures blur control in ways you do not notice until you need autonomy fast. I separated accounts carefully. I updated passwords. I redirected deposits. Nothing flashy, nothing suspicious, just quiet alignment. If you have ever felt your stomach tighten at the thought of needing permission to leave, you understand why this matters. Money is not power. Access is. I made sure I had it. Emotionally, I stayed disciplined. That was the hardest part. There were moments when I wanted to confront him, moments when anger surged and demanded expression, moments when sadness crept in late at night and tempted me to reach for familiarity instead of freedom. I did not. Emotional control is not suppression, it is intention. I let myself feel privately and stayed neutral publicly. I laughed when expected, responded when necessary, offered nothing extra. He noticed the shift, of course. He asked if I was okay more often. He became strangely attentive, like someone sensing movement beneath still water. He started explaining himself unprompted, offering reassurance I had not asked for. That was confirmation. When people lose access to your emotions, they feel it immediately. I kept my routines intact: work, meetings, deadlines, performance. If anything, I became sharper, more focused, less distracted by emotional noise. And then something interesting happened. Doors started opening quietly. Conversations that had stalled moved forward. Projects I had been sidelined from resurfaced. People sought my input directly again. It was subtle but noticeable. I realized that stepping back from emotional chaos had restored my professional gravity. I documented everything, not obsessively, not emotionally, factually: dates, decisions, communications, patterns. I did not know yet how much I would need, but I understood the value of being prepared in a system that respects paper more than pain. All of this happened while he believed the situation was under control. That was the part that almost made me smile. He thought the apology had resolved things. He thought compliance meant closure. He thought silence meant peace. He never asked what my silence meant, and I never corrected him. Planning without noise requires restraint. It requires trusting yourself enough not to seek validation while you move. It requires resisting the urge to be seen as right in favor of being safe. I was not plotting revenge. I was building an exit that did not collapse under pressure. Every choice I made pointed toward one goal: leaving intact. Not dramatic, not broken, not scrambling. intact. By the time he started sensing that something had shifted beyond his reach, the foundation was already set. The options were already lined up. The safety nets already secured. All that remained was timing, and timing is something you can only control when no one knows you are counting down. The shift did not announce itself. It never does. It showed up in the way his questions changed, in the way his confidence stopped landing cleanly, in the way he started watching me instead of assuming me. At first, it was subtle, a pause after I spoke, a glance that lingered half a second too long. He asked where I was going when I left early, asked who I had met for coffee. Asked questions he never used to ask because he never felt the need to. Control feels safest when it is invisible. When it starts slipping, people notice. I stayed calm on purpose. Not distant, not cold, just steady. I answered what needed answering and nothing more. I did not fill silences. I did not volunteer reassurance. I let gaps exist and watched what rushed in to fill them. It was fear, not loud fear, not panic, the quieter kind. The kind that shows up as over-explaining and sudden attentiveness. He started justifying decisions I had not questioned. He offered updates I had not requested. He checked in emotionally in a way that felt rehearsed. That was new. Meanwhile, I felt lighter. Not because the situation was resolved, but because I no longer felt trapped inside it. Detachment had done its work. Planning had done its work. Now I was watching, not reacting. Power dynamics always reveal themselves when one person stops playing their assigned role. He expected me to be defensive, grateful for scraps of attention. When none of that showed up, the script failed. I noticed it in public too. At meetings, he waited for my response instead of speaking over it. When others deferred to him, he glanced at me first, as if checking alignment. He had started sensing that I was no longer positioned beneath him. That unsettled him. People often assume power shifts happen through confrontation, through loud declarations and dramatic moments. That is not how it works most of the time. Real shifts happen quietly, when one person realizes the other no longer needs their approval to function. I did not challenge him. I did not threaten him. I simply stopped orbiting him, and that changed the gravity in every room we shared. He tried to reassert control, gently at first. Subtle reminders of his role. Casual mentions of influence. He framed it as concern, as protection, as leadership. None of it landed because I was no longer measuring myself against him. That is when the fear sharpened. He started asking what I wanted, not in a generous way, in a careful way, as if the answer might cost him something. He asked if I was happy, if we were okay, if I needed anything. Those questions would have mattered once. Now they felt late. I stayed composed. I did not punish him with silence. I did not reward him with reassurance. I let my calm speak for itself. There is something deeply unsettling about calm when it does not seek resolution. He felt it. He grew restless. His certainty frayed at the edges. The authority he used so effortlessly before began requiring reinforcement. I watched him realize, slowly, that the leverage he thought he had no longer guaranteed compliance. And here is the part most people do not talk about. When power shifts, it is not the person losing control who feels it first. It is the person who has already let go. I was no longer waiting for permission to move. I was choosing when. And that choice changed everything between us, whether he admitted it or not. He had underestimated how dangerous calm could be. By the time he fully understood what was happening, the shift was already complete. I just had not made it visible yet. The room was louder than it should have been. Music floated through the space, polished and upbeat, the kind chosen to keep people relaxed and distracted. Glasses clinked. Laughter came easily. The company party was doing exactly what it was designed to do: create the illusion that everything was fine. He thought this was the safest place to corner me. Executives filled the room, faces familiar, voices practiced, people who watched power closely because their careers depended on it, people who noticed shifts before they were ever announced. He stood beside her near the center, confident, composed, exactly where a CEO belonged. She looked flawless, relaxed, already behaving like someone who expected protection. They both assumed I would fall in line. He caught my eye and gave a small nod. Not warm, not kind, instructional. This was it. The moment he expected me to apologize, to smile tightly, to say the words that would put everything back where he wanted it. He expected discomfort, embarrassment, a quiet surrender in front of witnesses. I felt none of that. What I felt was stillness. I stepped forward, and the space around us shifted. Conversations softened. People sensed something was happening, even if they could not yet name it. He waited. So did she. I did not look at her first. I looked at him, and that was the mistake he did not anticipate. I spoke clearly, calm enough to carry across the room without raising my voice. I did not rush. I did not explain. I did not apologize. I thanked the room. I acknowledged the team, the work, the momentum we had built together. Safe words, neutral words, the kind people nod along to without resistance. Then I changed direction. I announced my decision. Not emotional, not dramatic, just factual. I stated that I would be stepping away from my current role, effective immediately. That I had accepted a promotion aligned with my long-term goals. That the transition had already been approved. The air shifted. People straightened. Eyes moved. Someone stopped mid-sip. I did not look at him yet. I finished speaking first. Only then did I turn. His expression froze, not because he was angry, but because he was confused. This was not the script. This was not the outcome he had prepared for. She looked at him, searching for reassurance that did not come fast enough. That was the power reversal. He tried to recover, smiling too quickly, stepping forward as if to redirect the moment. But the room had already recalibrated. Attention had shifted. Control had slipped. People do not miss moments like that. Questions followed, polite but pointed. Congratulations offered with curiosity underneath. He answered where. But the authority in his voice had softened. He was explaining now, not directing. I stood there, composed, answering only what was asked, nothing more. I did not correct him. I did not expose him. I did not need to. The reversal was complete without a single accusation. He had expected me to break publicly. Instead, I repositioned myself. That is the thing about power. It does not belong to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the one who controls the outcome without revealing the process. As I stepped away, I caught his eye one last time. Not with anger, not with triumph, with clarity. He finally understood that the apology he demanded was never coming. And worse, he understood that the moment he chose public humiliation as a tool, he lost the ability to control how the story ended. I walked out of that room intact. He stayed behind, surrounded by people, suddenly very aware that the ground beneath him had shifted. The break he expected never happened. And everyone saw it. I did not rush my exit. That mattered more than it might seem. Leaving in a hurry looks like escape. Leaving calmly looks like choice. I moved through the room at my own pace, offering brief goodbyes, steady smiles, nothing that invited questions or pity. No drama, no speeches, no parting shots. That was intentional. He watched me from across the room, still trying to regain footing, still calculating what this meant and how much control he had actually lost. For the first time in a long while, his authority did not follow him the way it used to. I felt it as I stepped outside. The air hit differently, cooler, cleaner, like the moment after a storm passes and everything feels sharper. I paused for a second, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to mark it. This was the point of no return. Walking away did not feel like loss. It felt like release. I was not leaving behind a future. I was stepping into one that no longer required permission. The revenge was not loud. It did not involve exposure or confrontation or watching him unravel publicly. It was quieter than that, stronger. I left with my dignity intact, my reputation untouched, my options open. He had tried to take my voice. He had tried to corner me into submission. He had underestimated how much strength there is in refusing to play the role someone assigns you. Freedom feels strange when you have not tasted it in a while. It is light and unsettling at the same time. There is no script, no safety net disguised as obligation, just space. I welcomed it. By the time I reached my car, my phone had already started buzzing. Messages I did not open. Calls I did not answer. None of it felt urgent anymore. That was the clearest sign that the power had shifted for good. I drove away without looking back, not because I was bitter, not because I was angry, because there was nothing left for me there. He had taken what he thought he could take, my trust, my patience, my silence. What he did not realize was that he had also handed me clarity, and clarity is worth more than anything he tried to strip away. The story he wanted to control ended the moment I chose myself. That was the revenge, not destruction, freedom. Life did not suddenly become perfect after I walked away. That is not how healing works. What changed was quieter, but far more powerful. The noise stopped, the constant tension, the second guessing. The emotional calculations that once filled every day slowly faded. In their place came something unfamiliar: peace. Mornings felt different, not dramatic, just lighter. I woke up without the weight of bracing myself, no rehearsing conversations in my head, no scanning my phone for messages that could shift my mood before I even stood up. I had space to think again. With that space came clarity about who I was without the roles I had been carrying. Not a wife managing someone else's ego. Not a professional shrinking herself to avoid conflict. Just me. At first, the silence felt strange. Identity takes time to rebuild when it has been shaped around someone else's power. But slowly, pieces returned. Confidence that had been muted. Curiosity that had been postponed. Ambition that no longer needed to be justified. I made decisions without checking how they would be received. That alone was freeing. My work changed. I spoke more directly. I trusted my instincts again. People responded to that. Opportunities followed not because I demanded them, but because I finally allowed myself to be seen fully. Emotionally, I learned something important. Healing is not about forgetting. It is about no longer organizing your life around what hurt you. His choices stopped being the reference point for my growth. My future stopped being defined by what I escaped. I built routines that belonged to me, connections that felt mutual, a version of success that did not require performance or permission. There were moments of grief. Of course there were. You do not leave a chapter like that without mourning what you thought it would become. But grief did not own me. It passed. What stayed was a new identity rooted in self-trust. I was no longer reacting. I was choosing. And that choice echoed through everything. Peace, I learned, is not the absence of struggle. It is the absence of betrayal, especially self-betrayal. It is waking up aligned with your values. It is recognizing your worth without needing someone else to confirm it. I did not rebuild my life overnight. I rebuilt it intentionally, and that made all the difference. The lesson did not arrive gently. It did not come wrapped in encouragement or wisdom or well-meaning advice. It came through humiliation, silence, and the slow realization that I had been negotiating my self-respect for the illusion of stability. Here is the truth I learned too late. Love that requires you to shrink is not love. Security that demands silence is not safety. Power that punishes honesty is not leadership. I spent too long believing that patience was strength, that loyalty meant endurance, that if I just explained myself better, softened my tone, waited for the right moment, things would shift. They did not, because the problem was never my delivery. It was the system I was standing inside. A system where my value was conditional, where my voice mattered only when it did not challenge someone else's control. Self-respect is not loud. That surprised me. It does not always announce itself with ultimatums or dramatic exits. Sometimes it shows up quietly, the moment you stop asking for permission to exist fully. Empowerment is not about winning against someone else. It is about refusing to lose yourself. I learned that boundaries are not punishments. They are information. They tell people how to treat you. And when someone reacts badly to a bow, that reaction is the answer. Not every betrayal looks like betrayal at first. Sometimes it looks like love mixed with authority, care mixed with control, protection mixed with punishment. That is what makes it dangerous. If you are watching this and something in your chest feels tight, if parts of this story sound uncomfortably familiar, pause for a moment. Ask yourself one question. Where have you been explaining your worth instead of standing in it? Choosing yourself does not make you selfish. It makes you honest. And honesty is powerful in a world that benefits from your silence. I learned that walking away is not failure when staying costs you your identity. I learned that peace is not something you earn after enduring enough pain. It is something you choose the moment you stop betraying yourself. I learned it too late to save the relationship, but not too late to save myself. And that made all the difference. If you stayed with me until here, pause for a second. Not F. For yourself. Stories like this do not hit hard because they are dramatic. They hit hard because they feel familiar. Because somewhere between the control, the silence, and the power imbalance, many women recognize pieces of their own lives. This was never just about a husband, a job, or a public moment. It was about choice, about the quiet decisions we make when no one is watching, about the moments where we either protect our peace or trade it for comfort, about learning, sometimes painfully, that loyalty should never require self-erasure. If you're in a place right now where you feel smaller than you used to, where you are constantly explaining yourself, softening your voice, or doubting your instincts, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not too much. You are not imagining it. And you are not weak for wanting more. Power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it shows up as calm, as boundaries, as the decision to stop begging for respect and start requiring. And here is the part that matters most. Your story does not have to look like mine to deserve a different ending. You do not need permission to choose yourself. You do not need validation to walk away from what harms you. You do not need to break to prove your strength. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay quiet, plan carefully, and leave with your dignity intact. Now, I want to hear from you. Comment and tell me if something like this has ever happened to you. If it has, share your story with me. And you can also tell me, if you were in my place, what would you have done?